Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 12 October 2016, coming to you with a knife review on a modern folder, no less. It seems like, it seems like my kids were in diapers last time I did a knife review on a modern folder. I think this one will be worthy of some camera time on the TheApostleP channel. This is the Mosier Midtech Crossfire. According to David's website, the Midtech Crossfire is a mechanical equivalent of a custom crossfire, just more mass-produced and with more no-frills finishing. No exotic finishes, hand-rubbed satins, exotic materials, just sort of garden variety, modern folder stuff. So what do we have here? Well, we have a rather handsome, rather broad clip point blade fashioned of crucible CPM 154 blade steel. Sort of a bayonet grind where a saber grind primary bevel meets a deep swedge. Stock thickness is 5/32, about 157 thousandths on this one. The primary bevel grind is flat, terminates in a pretty thin dimension behind the edge. That blade is attached to a handle, a frame of 6Al4V titanium. Both blade and titanium frame are finished in a very high contrast, very smooth and attractive stonewash. Superb for an EDC knife in the way that it hides scuffs, scratches, shiny spots. It just does a great job. The knife is deployed via flipper only. Kind of a neat little shark fin flipper that is extremely functional. Flipping action isn't, spectacular. It's just really good, really reliable, and opens very securely. No blade play in any direction on this knife. Lockup is achieved via a titanium frame lock with a carbidized lock face. This one kind of early, maybe 20%, if that. I might prefer to see that just a little deeper. Mechanics, other than that lockup, are pivot, a two-sided round variety, as custom makers are wont to use. They sort of like that double wrench assembly. I've heard this from several custom makers, although word is out, or the jury is out, I guess, on how well it's going to stay put. There's no D-shaped pivot barrel or head restraint. You're just kind of dependent on friction and or Loctite. I don't see this one coming loose. It hasn't come loose since I've been messing with it for a couple weeks. This is the property of my viewer and customer Chris. So let's continue, shall we, in dimensions. That blade that is a pretty well proportioned clip point is 3 3/8 inches long as I measure it. I think official specs are listed at 3.5. The handle is 4 5/8 inches long and just a tick under 1/2 inch thick, so pretty slim in this dimension. The pocket clip is a flat stock and formed titanium variety. It's a pretty effective clip, more than adequate retention strength. I would maybe prefer to see a little more rise at the front of that clip. It's a little work getting it into the pocket, but it isn't going anywhere either. The weight on the knife, so a sub 3.5 inch bladed titanium flipper, all tie handle. It's not a large knife. It's a medium-sized knife. Weighs in at a robust 6.1 ounces. But I'll tell you guys, such perfect balance. In hand, it does not feel like a 6.1 ounce knife. Talk about construction a minute, and frankly, at its price point, $375. I'm a little underwhelmed by the construction, by the engineering of the knife. It is held together by the pivot and an internal stop pin, which I think you can see as you look down through the knife. See it right there? And that's a floating pin. And then the back of the knife is held together with 4 T8 torque screws and non-shouldered barbell style standoffs. So the only 2 positive points of location in this direction are the pivot and the internal stop pin, which are really close together, and the stop pin, of course, not restrained. So you're kind of dependent on threads and friction to keep this knife all in the right place. As it's assembled now, and I've had it apart and had it back together, blade is dead center. Blade action is nice and free, although it's not a close on your fingers knife the way I've got it adjusted, but it's still very smooth, very free. You're probably wondering, with caged ball bearings and an all titanium handle, are there hardened steel washers in the titanium? No, there are not. So you've got very, very hard ball bearings running on a fairly soft titanium surface, and these bearings have worn a shiny spot in the titanium on both sides. One school of thought, although, on that feature, I've talked to a couple engineers with some cred who say that when that groove, that channel, starts to form and be burnished by the bearings, they get to a certain depth, and then the surface area that contacts each ball becomes great enough that the wear sort of stops, and you end up with this this shallow, burnished, smooth track that the bearings ride in. And frankly, I'm not going to argue with that. What you've got here is a really smooth action. Not just free, but smooth. This knife is broken in nicely. You know, I don't feel ball bearings rolling around on a less than perfect surface. I just feel smoothness. It's very nicely done. You know, it's sort of a bare bones construction, but very nicely done. And it appears to be engineered to very precise dimensions and doesn't appear to be going anywhere. So, yeah. So let's talk about ergonomics, shall we? Well, in a standard saber grip, ergos are very good. We've got a nice thumb ramp. Does this knife remind you guys of anything? It does me. It reminds me of that Les George designed ZT-0900, although we've got about another half an inch of blade length. This is sort of the knife I think the 900 should have been. You know, it's not so stubby with this broad clip point blade at 3 3/8 inches. It really is pretty attractive. And that thumb ramp, working with some not sharp but still effective jimping, gives you a very secure grip in the saber grip. A well executed choil. You see how the plunge grind is finished by the time we get to the beginning of the cutting edge, although it's right on the hairy edge. It's going to require a fairly obtuse sharpening angle not to get into that plunge grind for resharpening. But although I don't think it's really designed as a forward finger choil, if you sort of be mindful of keeping your index finger pulled tightly against the frame, it can certainly be used that way. in the hammer grip. Very secure, but the hand is just a little constrained. The pinky doesn't quite know where to be. If you let it fall back here on the flat, pretty comfortable. If you try to squeeze it up into this 2-finger groove, it's not so comfortable. But if you let your hand sort of splay out and use the whole handle, plenty comfortable. Then you could come forward in the hammer grip. And you're really comfortable for some nice powerful work. That thumb runs right down the curve of the front of the handle frame. Actually, that's a pretty good grip. Draw cut grip, very nice. Notice how the finger guard in the frame is beautifully integrated with that flipper in the open position. Just a very nice, comfortable, wide surface. So it doesn't really dig into the web of the hand in the draw cut grip. In the reverse grip, maybe a little short for a tactical blade, but that feels pretty good, guys. And in the forward pinch grip, sort of let the index finger come around the front of the frame. That's a nice grip for, you know, cutting up veggies or whatever you need to do. Not a bad knife at all. Should we see if it cuts? This is a knife for review from a customer. I'm not sharpening this one. Look at that. Spoiler alert though, guys. This is not the this is the first page of the Natchez Shooter Supply catalog, so it's almost like cover paper. It's not that really nasty, grainy, limp, fibrous stuff. But you know, it's got some dull spots on it, but that's a pretty good factory edge. Could be sharper. So when I think about what I would compare this knife to, you know, this Midtech segment is getting to be a pretty crowded place in the market. And I think when you're a custom knife maker of renown and you can bring one of these to market, completely made in the United States, by the way, at under $400, I think you got something. So the Crossfire sells for $375. And it's a pretty credible effort. I don't know if it's quite as well done as the Olamic Midtech 24/7 Wayfarer, but I think it's a little better than that Spartan Harsey knife. It's very similar in its construction, but it seems to be just a little better executed than that one. At least this particular version is. What do you guys think of these milled flutes or fullers in the handle slabs? I kind of like those. That's only in the show side, I guess. A little bit of tool marking in there. The stonewash, of course, is either done before the milling or the stones don't get into those milled areas. I'm thinking the milling's done after stonewash, but you get a little nice contrast and finish with the glint off those flutes. Kind of like that. Got a lanyard hole if you so desire to use it. Of course, it's right hand only, tip up, which is probably a good thing for my budget because I kind of like this knife. I'd use this knife. Yeah, the flipping action I just can't say enough about. You just sort of lay your index finger there and apply force in about any direction, and out she comes with authority. Super comfortable flipper, by the way. And watch this. Put my thumb on the lock bar in a nice natural position, bring the blade down until the flipper touches my thumb, and we are past the detent. Either hand. That's a big deal to me, guys. There's nothing more annoying than doing that and then finding out you're not over the detent ball. Nicely done. What a beauty. And a rather attractive thing too, isn't it? Robust looking but not stubby. With that clip. Just makes it. Cool knife. Good job, David. Well, you know what, guys? This one's not going home to its owner. Tonight's Wednesday. I'm going to try to have this video up and live before I go to bed tonight. But stay tuned. Something might happen with this knife on Thursday. Huh. It could be that its owner needs a little cash. So stay tuned, my friends. That's all for this one. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.